Hello, everyone. So today we have Ms. Shreya Roy with us, who is a student of Sri Ram College of Commerce, Delhi University. And a little detail about Shreya. Shreya has done her internship with one of the investment banks, and now she is working with a development consultancy. So, welcome to Education View 360, Shreya.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So, Shreya, moving on to our question answer session, please tell us what are guesstimates and how important they are in placements.
If you break down the word guesstimate, right, it breaks down into the word guess and estimate. So essentially, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get to a number or you're trying to estimate a number with limited information, right? These could be questions like, let's say, estimate the size of the smartphone market in India, right? Usually, when you're doing market sizing in a formal manner, you need a lot of data, you need a lot of information. But when interviewers are asking you such questions in an interview scenario, they're basically trying to see how you can use the limited information that you have to get to a number that's as close to what the real number actually is, right? And why guesstimates are important is essentially because they are a big part of the recruitment process for most companies, especially in the consulting space and in the investment banking space. Interviewers will ask you guesstimates in and of themselves, and also guesstimates will be asked through the form of case questions as well, right? So you can either get asked an individual question, which is a guesstimate, or you could be asked a guesstimate which is a part of a bigger case, right? And that is why guesstimates are important.
All right, Shreya, thank you for that. Shreya, would you please share some tips how one should prepare for these guesstimates, or would you like to solve a few examples for the students? So, what are the things to be considered?
When you're usually doing interview prep, there are a lot of resources out there to help you learn what a guesstimate is and how to solve one, right? You have all of these different case books that are available, like Case Interviews Cracked or Case in Point, right? They have a lot of examples. And the thing with solving guesstimates is that it's all about practice. It's like any other math problem. The more guesstimates you solve, the more you understand how to structure your thoughts, and you can get to, let's say, a couple of formats which you can use for most guesstimates. Although I wouldn't really recommend rote learning guesstimate formats, since every question is unique in its own way, right? So these are just some of the resources you can use, and mostly what you will see in these books and what other videos will tell you is that there are either, depending on the person explaining, there are either two or three types of guesstimates broadly, right? One is a demand side guesstimate, a second is a supply side guesstimate, and a third is, let's say, a miscellaneous or offbeat guesstimate. And there are certain common tricks and tips that you can use to solve each type. So now I'm just going to walk you through two examples. One would be a demand side guesstimate, and the second would be, you can either call it a supply side guesstimate or an offbeat as well. Sometimes people tend to combine those two, the last two categories. So I'll just share my screen and then we can I'll walk you through some of the examples. So as I had already discussed with you, a guesstimate is basically estimating a number with limited information. Let's move to the first example. Let's say this is a hypothetical question that you get in an interview, wherein the interviewer asks you to estimate the number of cars sold in India each year. Now, at face value, this question seems pretty difficult to solve because you won't really have information regarding what the sales numbers for cars look like. You might not even know how many cars are currently, let's say, on the roads in India right now. The first thing you need to remember when you're solving a guesstimate is that the interviewer is more interested in your approach than they are interested in the final number. Obviously, the final number holds a little importance, right? You can't say, let's say, three cars are sold in India every year. That's quite unreasonable. But let's say if you are at least in the same degree, like let's say if the actual number is in crores and your answer is also in crores, then the interviewer will be pretty satisfied with your answer, and they are more interested in how you got to that number rather than the final number itself. That is why you need to always think out loud and make sure you take time to properly structure your thoughts, right? So I think the first thing I'm going to show you here is what your paper should look like in an in an interview format. So usually in an interview, they will give you A4 size papers, or you should take, if not, then you should, it's always safe to take a notebook and pen of your own, right? And I would suggest you solve a guesstimate in a landscape mode rather than portrait mode. It just gives you more space to make the structure and to sort of do the calculations. So I would suggest you divide your paper into these four parts. On the top of the paper, while the interviewer is telling you the question, you should note down the important points of the question. So this question is pretty short, so we just wrote it down directly, which is estimate the number of cars sold in India each year. But sometimes the question tends to be really long. So what you can do is you can basically cut out the noise and just write down the important points of the question on the top of the paper. And then below the question, you can divide the paper into three sections. One is for clarification questions. The biggest section in the middle should be for your structure and your format and your approach. And the third section is for rough work, because you will be doing a lot of calculations when you are solving a guesstimate. Now, I'll explain to you what clarification means. So, right now, the question is really broad and very vague, right? We don't know exactly what the interviewer is looking for. And that is why, in a guesstimate, not only are we allowed, we are encouraged actually to ask clarification questions. And mind you, that the interviewer will judge you and will evaluate you on the basis of what kind of questions you are asking, whether they are relevant, right? Whether they are well thought out. So, always, even when you are asking questions, take time to think it through, right? So some of the examples of some clarification questions that we could possibly ask in this guesstimate are, let's say, number one, whether you want us to estimate the number for cars that are commercial or personal use cars, right? Cars are owned by households, and also, let's say, there are a lot of taxi drivers or Ola Uber drivers, right? There are commercial use vehicles as well, right? So let's say we ask this clarifying question, and the interviewer tells us that it's okay for us to just estimate the personal use vehicles for now. Then let's say you can ask another clarifying question wherein you're asking, what type of car, is there a certain type of car that you want me to estimate? Let's say a sedan or an SUV, right? Whether we are looking at high end cars or budget cars, right? These are some of the questions that you can ask, and assuming in the situation that the interviewer tells you to estimate all types of personal use vehicles, right? Another maybe extra question that you can ask is, do we also count car exports from India, right? Not just cars sold in India's domestic market, but let's say cars that are sold from India to other countries. Let's say the interviewer tells you no, that they only want cars sold within the country of India, right? So once you have gone through, these are just some examples. If you have any other questions, definitely you can ask them. But these are just some examples of what I thought the clarifications could be in this scenario, right? And in this situation, once you are done asking for clarifications, I would suggest you ask the interviewer for 2 or 3 minutes to think about your structure, right? Because what needs to happen when you're solving a guesstimate is that you need to walk the interviewer through your entire structure, through your entire thought process first before you start solving. And this is very important. This will only help you as an interviewee, because if the interviewer finds an issue with your structure, then before you have done only any calculations, only they will point it out there. And then you can have a conversation with an interviewer about why they think your approach is inappropriate, or what other approach you can use. If you take them through the guesstimate also step by step, and in the middle they find some kind of issue, it will be really difficult to backtrack all of those calculations. So I suggest ask the interviewer that, sir or ma'am, can I just get 3 minutes to structure my thoughts? And they will be more than happy to provide you that time, right? Then take those 3 minutes to think about your entire structure and write it down on the paper. This is a very basic structure for how you can solve this guesstimate. And also, since I am giving you an example, I will tell you that this structure is extremely simplified. There are obviously layers that you can add, and I will get to those layers when I'm taking you through the structure. So let's say we start with, and this is a demand side guesstimate. So demand side guesstimates usually tend to follow the format of starting with the population of a country or the population of a city, right? That is, it's because there is no there isn't really a constraint on the supply side here if you look, So let's say how many cars are sold in India in a year, that depends mostly on how many cars are demanded, right? There is no, limit. There might be, let's say, there is a limit to factory space and labor available, but there is a greater constraint here on the demand end. Okay, and these are just some of the hints. The more you practice, actually, you'll understand which format to use in which question. So, starting with this question, you can see that I have started with the population of India. Now, in the next step, what you need to do is come to the number of households. Because usually, let's say population of India, you say there's 120 crore people, okay, but you don't want to estimate. It's not really easy to say how many cars each individual will own, because there are individuals from different age categories, different income, from different like income backgrounds, right? So it's easier to divide it by, let's say, to get to a number for the number of households, because people tend to buy cars per household instead of per person, right? So once you've gotten a number of households, what you can do is you can take a urban rural split. And here I have made a very simplifying assumption by saying that we can completely ignore the rural segment, because what in rural India, usually people tend to have lower incomes, and thus might prefer either two wheelers, or a lot of people in rural areas might not have cars. Mind you, again, I'm saying that this is a very simplifying assumption. People in rural areas in India do have cars, but for the simplicity of our solution, we can say, let's say for now, let's ignore the rural segment and focus on urban. Now, again, you can divide urban into high, middle, and low incomes, right? You can even tell the interviewer, let's say that for high income, I'm expecting, let's say, people who have an yearly income of 12 lakh plus. You can give these sort of justifications, this sort of information to just let the interviewer know what you're thinking, what you consider as high income, what you consider as middle income, because people might have different definitions for these. So, depending on the different income classes, from there you can get to a number of cars per household. So, let's say high income households will probably have more cars. Low income households will probably either have no cars or one car, right? Once you have gotten to, let's say, this level, you will get a number which is the current number of cars that are in India right now, right? But what we need is the number of cars sold in India each year. To do that, we will use the replacement period. Now, once I'm getting to the calculation, I will tell you what a replacement period is. And this is very useful when you're calculating market sizes for products like cars, smartphones, etc. Right? And here, again, as I said, on the right hand side corner, you can do rough work for any calculations that you might need to do. Now, here I have just added my numbers. I have walked, let's say in this scenario, I have walked the interviewer through my structure. I've told them that this is the structure I'm going to follow, and I will ask them, is this okay, or do you see any issues, or can I make this assumption? Is this fine? Right? You're going to ask them these clarifying questions. Let's say you get the all okay. Now you start actually solving the guesstimate, right? And this is easy. Now, once you have the structure down, it's all about maths, right? You just have to do plus, minus, multiply, divide. So the population of India is approximately 120 crores. It's actually 130 something, but because 120 is divisible by a lot of numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, we take 120 to make our calculation simple. Again, because they don't care about the actual number, you can make these approximations. You are allowed to drop decimal numbers. You are allowed to take numbers that are highly divisible by several numbers, because that will make your calculation easier. So it's allowed for you to change, let's say, 130 crores to 120 crores, just to make your calculation simple. So you have 120 crore people in India, and now to get to the number of households, you just divide by the number of average number of people per household. So in India, you would either say that that's 4, or you could say 5. Here I've shown you calculations for both. Yeah, so if you divide by 4, you get 30 crore households. And I'm sorry, but there's an error here. If you divide by 5, you actually get 24 crore households and not 25. So please ignore this error. And for the sake of our calculation, we will be continuing with the number of 30 crores. So we are assuming that the average number of people per household in India are 4. The total number of people are 120 crore. So 120 divided by 4 is 30 crore. So that's 30 crore total households. Now coming to India's urban rural split, right? Usually what people do is we know that India, right, currently has more of a rural population than an urban population. And the urban population is slowly increasing, but still the rural population is currently in the majority. So what people do is usually they take numbers like 40, 60. It is also acceptable to take numbers like 30, 70 for urban rural split. Here I just find the calculation for 40, 60 easier. So that is what I have taken. So 40% urban households means 12 crore households. And since we're ignoring the rural sector, we are not calculating the number for the rural segment. It is important to us that there are 12 crore households in the urban segment in India. Now, coming to an income split, right? We divide it into high, middle, low. Again, sometimes people divide it into high, and then you can have two different sections for middle also. You can have upper middle, you could have lower middle, right? You can even have a section for below poverty line. So you can make your structure more elaborate, right? That will help you get to a more accurate number. But just for simplicity right now, I have divided it only into high, middle, and low incomes, right? And I have taken a number of, let's say, 10% high income households, just because it is an extreme, right? Usually what happens is that on either extreme of the spectrum, there tends to be lesser observations or lesser amount of people, and most of the data tends to be concentrated in the middle, right? So this is your if there are any economic students out there, this is what a normal curve basically looks like, right? So you take 10% high income households. I've assumed 50% middle income households because the middle class in India's urban population is a large chunk, and I have taken 40% low income households. Now, a trick for if you think you can't justify these numbers, if you think you can't tell the interviewer why you're taking, because they will ask you, let's say, why do you think there are only 10% high income households? An easy trick to use is 20, 60, 20 trick. And this is or you can even do 10, 80, 10. So because as I said that usually on the extremes, there tends to be less number of people or less number of observations, you can say that this is why I'm putting basically the large chunk of people in the middle, because scientifically it's called the normal curve, right? Which is a lot of data sets in life tend to follow this pattern, wherein a lot of the observations are concentrated in the middle. So you could put less number of percentages or less weightage on the extremes, and you could have higher weightage concentrated in the middle, right? So you could even do 20, 60, 20 here, right? It's all about how you are able to justify these numbers. So now we have taken, let's say 10, 50, 40 here, and that's 10% of 12 crore households is 1.2 crores, 50% is 6 crores, and 40% is 4.8 crores. Now, as I said, to make your calculation easier, you are allowed to round off numbers. So here we are rounding off 1.2 to 1 crores, 6 remains 6, and we're rounding off 4.8 crores to 5 crores. You get that if you add this up, you get the total of 12 crores that we had in the urban segment. Now we get to cars per household, right? I have assumed in my solution that high income households, that all are high income households, first I have assumed that they have cars, right? And on average, each household has 2 cars. Then for middle income, I have assumed that yes, all of them do have cars, and each household on average has 1 car. For low income households, I have taken a number of 0.5. Now, for some of you, this might not make sense that how do households have half a car? But that's not actually what it means. It means that here I have assumed that only 50% of the lower income household has a car, right, in the first place, and that 50% that does have a car will have only 1 car. So that is the same as saying that every household has half a car, right? Even though practically that might be hard to wrap your head around, mathematically, if you solve it out, you will get the same solution basically, right? So I have taken 0.5 here. And it's important to sort of have these like math tips and tricks. It's helpful if you're good at mental math, right? It's helpful if your math fundamentals are strong, because that just makes the calculation easier and it makes your solution more streamlined, right? Which is more impressive for the interviewers. So once you now get to these assumptions, which are very easily justifiable, obviously high income households, you can say that by observation I've seen they tend to have 2 cars. So now what you do is you multiply the number of cars per household by the number of households in each segment, right? So here you get 2 into 1, that's 2 crore cars. Then 1 into 6, that's 6 crore cars. And 0.5 into 5, that's 2.5 crore cars. And you add up this total and you get 10.5 crore cars. Okay, this number is basically the number of cars that are in India right now. And I will again remind you that this is, at least in my opinion, a big underestimation, because there are high income households that now have way more than 2 cars. People have sometimes 4 or 5 cars. Again, a big thing that we have done here is we have completely ignored the rural segment. It is for simplicity. It is not true that people in rural areas don't have cars, right? So this is a big underestimation, but we're doing it just to understand the structure, right? We don't care about the actual number. So you get a number for 10.5 crore cars, which is the total number of cars in India right now. But you need an estimate for the number of cars sold each year. Now, how you get to this, I mentioned this in the last slide, that you use the replacement period. So you can think of replacement period as, let's say, the lifespan of a particular product. Let's say we assume that any car in the market, whether it's an SUV or a sedan or a sports car, whatever it be, it has a lifespan of 10 years. Right now, what we're assuming is that then once this lifespan of 10 years is over, a person who owns a car right now will purchase a car, will have to purchase a new car after 10 years, because their old car has completely broken down. So you can use a very simplifying assumption and say that the total number of cars will be uniformly replaced over those 10 years. That I'm assuming that, let's say if there are 10 years, I'm assuming that 10% of the cars will be replaced this year, 10% in the second year, 10% in the third year, and then the final 10% in the 10 years, until all cars that are currently in the market are completely replaced, right? So in the next year, right, per year, you will have 10.5 divided by 10, which is 1.5 crore cars that are being sold in any given year. Again, here, this is an underestimate, not just because of the rural segment, not just because we ignored the rural segment, because it is not just people who are replacing their cars. There are new customers that are coming into the market, right? The market size is growing, people's incomes are increasing, the population is growing. So people will not just replace their cars in any year, they will also buy new cars, right? So for that, it's very easy. You can, let's say, take a simple percentage. Let's say there are 10%, let's say an additional 10% of this are new cars that are being sold in the market, and then you just add that number, right? And then you get to, let's say, a final number. So that is a very basic way of how you can solve a guesstimate like this. Now, these are just some important tips that I think you should remember. They do apply to all guesstimates, and some of them do specifically apply to the guesstimate that I just solved with you, right? So the first, which I had already talked about, is the first tip is always lay out an initial structure and get approval from the interviewer before solving, right? I've already talked about this. I've told you why this is important. Number one, it shows the interviewer that you have communication skills, right? That you are able to convey your thoughts and ideas to them. That is very important. Number two, it keeps the interviewer engaged, right? Guesstimates tend to take, let's say, 20 to 25 minutes to solve in an actual interview setting. And if you are not constantly talking to the interviewer, it is very easy for them to get bored and lose interest, right? So keep talking to them, keep engaging with them. Second tip, always ask for time to think, right? Interviewers want you to give a well thought out solution, right? No interviewer will ask you a question and then tell you to answer immediately. You can easily ask at least 2 to 3 minutes. You should definitely ask. You can even stretch it to 5. Let's say, can I take 5 minutes to think? Right? And really use those 2 to 3 or 5, how many ever minutes you've taken, really use them, because when you are talking to the interviewer, it is very difficult to solve and think at the same time. So make sure you have thought out your solution in advance before you start showing it to the interviewer. Then tip number 3, make calculations easy by dropping decimal places and rounding off wherever you can. That's pretty straightforward. Point number 4, think out loud. Again, this is very similar to the first tip that I have given you, that you should always involve the interviewer at each step, right? Justify your assumptions. You can even ask them, do you think this assumption is correct? If they don't think it's correct, sometimes they'll even give you data. Like, let's say you say, can I assume that the urban rural split in India is 50-50? And they're saying, no, I think it's more of a 40-60 split, right? Then that's easy for you. The interviewer has basically given you a part of the solution, right? So ask them whether your assumptions are correct. Then tip number 5, almost all guesstimates will require you to ask clarifying questions. but ensure that your questions are relevant. Do not ask for the sake of asking. There are some guesstimates that will be pretty straightforward. I mean, it is recommended that you ask one or two clarifying questions, but if you can't find any questions at that moment, right? Let's say you can't think of anything that needs clarification, then do not ask just for the sake of asking, because interviewers will evaluate you on the quality of your questions as well. Number six, make sure your calculations are neat. This is very important. A lot of people, and I know I've made this mistake before, where I've been in an interview setting and I have basically scribbled my calculations somewhere on the page. Then at the end of the guesstimate, the interviewer will point to any one part of your solution and tell you that I don't think this is right. Do it with these numbers. And you go back and you cannot find where you calculated that one particular part of your solution. So make sure you do calculations, try to do it next to the part of the structure where you are at, or do it very neatly in that rough work box. Basically, make sure your page is neat, because you can also use that page to explain your solution to the interviewer when you're done. And they need to basically understand what you've written. Now, number seven, and this is a new concept that I haven't talked about before in this video. It is advisable to do a sanity check once you are done solving the guesstimate to validate your results. Now, I'll tell you what a sanity check is. So, because the way we are solving these guesstimates is so vague, we don't have any real data. The data that we are using is very approximated, it's very vague, right? It is advisable to do a small calculation at the end. It shouldn't take more than 5 minutes to, let's say, verify your results. A very simple thing you can do, which a lot of people, which can apply to a lot of guesstimates, not to all, is you can divide your final number by, let's say, the population of India. Let's say if we divide the how many ever crores we got by the population of India, you get a number of 1 or 2%, and you think, yeah, I think it's pretty reasonable that at least 1 or 2% of the population will be buying a new car at any given year, right? And it's basically a way to rationalize the number that you have gotten, right? It is a way to give that number more context. So once you are done solving, you can say that, you can ask the interviewer, would you want me to do a sanity check? Sometimes they will tell you to do a sanity check yourself. But it is important to not make your sanity check a whole guesstimate in and of itself, right? The sanity check needs to be very quick, a very small, simple calculation, right? It shouldn't take another 20 minutes to do your sanity check only, right? Again, if the interviewer, honestly, if the interviewer tells you, no, I think it's fine, don't do a sanity check, then good for you, don't do one. You won't have to sort of do another calculation or find another way to get to the same number, right? So you can ask them. If they don't want one, then don't like necessarily solve one. Now, finally, the last tip is remain calm. Guesstimates can seem very daunting. They can seem very vague. They'll throw you a question and you will have no idea how to solve it, because there isn't really a way in which you can sit down and get to an accurate number for these questions, right? But again, this is not what interviewers are not looking for, accuracy or precision, right? They're looking for structured way of thinking. They're looking for communication skills. They're looking for and it's not, that doesn't mean, again, as I said, that doesn't mean you completely ignore what final number you were getting. But it's important here that even if you get a weird number, let's say you get a number like 10 lakhs, which seems very less, it's obvious that it seems very less compared to the number of people that are in India, right? You can say, okay, if you get a weird number, call yourself out. Say, okay, I think maybe I have made a calculation error somewhere. Maybe we have ignored some section. I think this is an underestimate. Let's go, I'll walk through the structure again and I'll see where the issue is there. Just the fact that you got that number and you realize that, yeah, I think this doesn't make sense, you could get points for that as well. So remain calm, right? The interviewers want to help you. They will be there to help you through the solution. You can take time to think, and it's very important because there are such complicated calculations. It's important you keep your mind also very calm and very clean in order to get the structure right, in order to get the calculations right. We'll move on to the next question, which is basically, you can either call this a supply side guesstimate. Some people will call it like a miscellaneous section guesstimate. What basically here means, any guess this you can actually call it any guesstimate in which you are not using the population approach, which you will end up using in a lot of guesstimates. Here if you look at it, here the constraint is more on, I won't call it supply exactly, but there is some physical constraint, right? Like estimate the number of ping pong balls that can fit into a swimming pool, right? This completely, there is a very obvious constraint here, and that is the size of the swimming pool, the volume of the ping pong balls, how much space they take, right? So there is a very tangible physical constraint here, right? Another example of this type of guesstimate is, let's say they'll ask you to guesstimate the number of burgers that McDonald's will sell, any McDonald's outlet will sell in a day. Again, this might be a little confusing because you might think that this depends on demand, right? The number of people that walk into a McDonald's. Sure, but it is easier in this scenario to use a supply side approach, right? You can say, what are the operating hours of this McDonald's? What is the seating capacity? For how much time will any one given customer sit in that McDonald's? So you can use these supply side constraints to basically make your guesstimates a lot easier. And in the beginning, actually, people find demand side guesstimates easier to solve because you have a almost set format there. You have population, usually you do urban rural, or you do number of households, or you do an income split. But the more you solve guesstimates, the more you will actually start loving supply side guesstimates because they are so much easier to justify, right? This is a solution that you can really think about. You have seen a swimming pool in your life, you have held a ping pong ball, so you can justify that I think that the size of the swimming pool should be this, or I think that these are the dimensions of a ping pong ball. So you can be that much more sure about your answer. So again, same structure, right? The question, clarification, structure, rough work, right? What are on the top you've written the question, which is the number of ping pong balls that can fit into a pool. Now here, let's say I just want to ask one clarifying question, that is it okay if I assume that the pool is an Olympic size pool? The interviewer says, sure, go ahead. I don't think there are any more clarifications to be asked. So I move on with my structure, right? Before that, obviously, I ask for 2 to 3 minutes to think. And once I'm done thinking, I have written down the structure on my piece of paper and I'm explaining it to the interviewer now. And I would say something like, we start with the dimensions of a standard Olympic size pool. We obviously find what the volume of that pool is, right? Then we find the volume occupied by one ping pong ball. So very straightforward. Divide the volume of the pool by the volume occupied by one ping pong ball, and you will get the number of ping pong balls in that can fit in a pool. Now, maybe another clarifying question that you can ask here that I haven't written down is, would the ping pong balls, let's say, are they allowed to make a mountain in the pool? Are they allowed to make a heap, or are they just, let's say, you stop filling up ping pong balls till the rim of the pool, right? Let's say the interviewer says, no, just calculate it till the rim, and there isn't a heap of balls on top of the pool. So you've written down the structure, now you get to the numbers. Now, the dimensions of a standard Olympic size pool tend to be 50 meters into 25 meters into 2 meters, right? Length, breadth, depth. It's okay if you don't know this. You can say, let's say you can very well say, I'm assuming the pool in my society, right? And you can say that I know I am 5 feet tall, and I think that if I lie down 3 times head to toe, then I think that would be the length of the pool. And you can say that's 5 into 3 because I'm 5 feet. There's 3 of me can lay down by the side of the pool. I think it's 15 meters, let's say, in length, right? You can use these sort of, again, as I said, these are things that you see in everyday life. You have seen a pool before, so you can very well justify what you think a size of a pool will be. A pool can be of any size. So it doesn't matter if you don't know what an Olympic size pool, what the dimensions of a pool are. Now here, I think it's easier for us to do this calculation in terms of feet because I'm thinking ahead here, because I think that I will be calculating the dimensions of a ping pong ball in inches, because that is how it's easier for me to visualize. How can anyone basically say that I think the diameter of a ping pong ball is 0.00 something feet, right? You do, that's not how your brain works. So you will try to do it in feet, so then you can in future convert it into inches, because you will be calculating the volume of a ping pong ball in inches, right? So converting this into feet, you get approximately 160 feet into 80 feet into 6 feet, right? Here I'm using this conversion where 1 meter is approximately equal to 3.2 feet. Now, very easy. What is the volume of the pool? And again, we are assuming a simplifying assumption we are taking is that the depth of the pool is uniform throughout. There isn't a shallow end and a deep end, that is just one big cuboid. So then to calculate the volume of the pool, you multiply the dimensions and you get approximately 76,800 cubic feet, right? Again, we know that 1 foot is equal to 12 inches. So you will be multiplying this number 76,800 by 12 cube. That is how you convert cubic feet into cubic inches, right? But now you don't, at this step, you don't have to complete that calculation. You can just write 76,800 into 12 into 12 into 12. You don't actually have to solve it, because in the next step, you will be cutting numbers, right? So don't sit and start solving 76,800 into 12 cube. Just leave it there. And then when you divide in the next step, a lot of numbers will be cut. Now, let's say volume occupied by one ping pong ball. Let's say I'm assuming that the dimensions of a ping pong ball, that a ping pong ball is a sphere, and I think that, let's say, the diameter of that sphere is 4 inches, right? I think a ping pong ball is approximately this much. I think this equals 4 inches, right? You don't have to be accurate. It could be 3, it could be 2, doesn't matter, right? Now, the reason I have, instead of taking out the volume of a sphere, I have taken out the volume of a cube, right? Because let's say when you are placing ping pong balls, think about this in your head. And this is, you can take out the volume of a sphere also, but the problem is then you have to use pi, right? The formula is a lot more complicated. And the way you can justify this to your interviewer is you say that when you are placing ping pong balls side by side, right, there is always some space that is left in the middle, right? So even though a ping pong ball is a sphere, it takes up a cubic amount of, let's say, it takes up a space equal to that of a cube, because of those little places that are left in the middle of all the ping pong balls, right? These are just some things that you can use to clarify. And honestly, chances are the interviewer won't even ask you why you're taking cube instead of sphere, right? You can say it to make it simpler. So now, to get the total volume of that ping pong ball, it's, since we're assuming it to be a cube, you just do 4 inches into 4 inches into 4 inches, because in that case that would be the height, length, and breadth of that cube. That is 64 cubic inches. And to do the total number of ping pong balls, you do 76,800 into 12 cube divided by 64, right? After a bunch of cutting and after a bunch of solving, what you get is you get a number of 2,073,600 ping pong balls that can fit in an Olympic sized pool, right? That is, I think, a pretty straightforward way to solve a question like this. And questions like this are common, right? A lot of the times interviewers can ask you how many ping pong balls can fit in to a standard aeroplane, right? So in that case, then you take out the volume of cylinder. Now, this is important, is that to solve a guesstimate, as you can see, I told you that we don't have much data, but there were some data points that we were using. We were using the population of India, right? We were using the size of an Olympic-sized swimming pool. We were using unit conversions. We were using area volume formula, right? So these are just a list of some of the. It's not an exhaustive list by far, right? It is, you can make, while you're solving estimates, what you can do is that side by side while you're solving, the important data that you need to use in your structure comes up, you can make a guesstimate fact sheet, right? So side by side you're filling in these facts, but these are just some of the facts that I think you can start with, right? One is, the first is, for any demand side guesstimate, you would need population of the country for which you are estimating. Most of the time, if you're giving an interview in India, interviewers will ask you an Indian guesstimate only, because you would be more familiar with that data. So population of India rounded off. Currently it's around 130 something crore. Rounded off to 120 because 12 is divisible by a lot of numbers. Then you get to, most of the times these interviewers, let's say, or your offices will be in big cities like Delhi, Mumbai, or Bangalore. So people tend to ask, let's say, city level guesstimates as well. So it's important to know population of Delhi, population of Mumbai as well. I think both of their populations are currently approximately 2 crore. So you can take 2 crore. Then again, this is very important. It's important to know urban rural split. You can take 40-60, you can take 30-70. The point is that majority is rural, right? Then male female split, you can take 50-50. for male female split. Then age split, right? I think divide the population into, let's say, age groups, maybe 0 to 10, 10 to 18, right? School going, college going, working, retired, right? And I think, let's say, majority of the people in India are either college are in the college going working age group, right? So let's say 18 to 60 is the majority of where the population lies, and then 60 above is a small population, and then below school going or school going is a smaller population. Then income split, where you take high, middle, low, or high, upper middle, lower middle, low, right? Again, as I've already told you the trick for this. Either you can use numbers of your own and justify them, or you can use that law of extremes, where you say that there is a lesser concentration of people at any extreme of the spectrum, and most of them are concentrated in the middle. Then second last is you need to know formulae, right? You need to know a basic formula that you learned till 10th grade in math class in school, right? Everyone has learned these formulae in school. It's not, even if you didn't have math in 11th 12th, you have learned this, because math is I think it's compulsory till 10th grade. I'm not sure, but I'm sure you have done these formulae, right? Area of a sphere, area of a cube, or volume, right? Or area of a circle, etc., etc. Then you need to know basic unit conversions like feet to inches, or meters to feet, or meters to centimeter, etc. Again, like, let's say if you're doing meters to feet, it doesn't have to be very accurate, because it's 3 point something something, right? So you don't have to use all the decimal places. You can even say, like, you can use 3 as the conversion, or 3.2. So these are just some of the important data points that you should start with. The list is not exhaustive, and then once you continue to solve guesstimates on your own, keep updating this list and keep adding data that you think will be useful. A lot of guesstimates, let's say, for example, tend to be based around airports for some reason. So it's good to know how many airports are there in India. It's good to know how many runways an average airport has, right? So it's just some of the data that will help you solve guesstimates in interviews. I hope that helped.
So thank you, Shreya. Thank you. That was very, very exhaustive. And I sincerely hope and pray that listening to your video, a lot of children are able to crack their interview and get good placements. That is the purpose of the entire YouTube channel. And I request the children to keep subscribing and keep sharing for the welfare of the student community. And also an appeal to the students, if you've got some excellent ideas, please share in the comment box. And also you can write to me at my email ID info.eschool5@gmail.com if you want to be the guest speaker, so that you can help others also with your experience. Thanks a lot, Shreya.
Thank you.